welcome, and thank you for being here tonight. Together we leave behind the noise of the day and drift toward a quieter place, where history murmurs in the distance and time moves a little slower. It means a lot that you're here, allowing my voice to keep you company in this calm space before sleep. If you'd like to support this journey, a like, a comment, or a quiet subscription can help keep the candle burning. Just a small gesture, but deeply appreciated. And if you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments, which historical era would you visit if you could dream yourself there tonight? Let your imagination wander, and let's collect these night travels one by one. This is Educational Bedtime, where the stories are long, the tone stays soft, and the past unfolds slowly like parchment beneath candlelight. Now, let your shoulders sink, let your breath deepen, and your thoughts quiet down like dust settling on ancient stone. Tonight, you and I will drift together into the streets of Renaissance Florence. Not the Florence of postcards or museum galleries, but the Florence of muddy shoes, sour wine, and restless thoughts. This is a story in 4 parts. We'll begin by imagining a single day, not as a noble, not as a genius, but as someone ordinary. What it meant to wake, to work, and to worry when the world around you was lit only by fire and filled with the hum of uncertainty. Then we'll follow the footsteps of a remarkable man, Leonardo da Vinci, whose mind burned brighter than the torches that lit his rooms. We'll wander through the pages of his life. Later, we'll open the dusty doors of mystery, peeking into the codes, the symbols, the puzzles he left behind. And finally, we'll recline, as the elite did, among silks and secrets, in the shadow of the Medici. But first, let us rise with the sun, in a humble room with stone floors and a cracked wall. Let us begin your day in Renaissance Florence. Chapter 1. Why you wouldn't survive a day in Renaissance Florence. Close your eyes and imagine yourself waking, not to the buzz of an alarm clock, but to the distant clang of a bell from the Duomo, echoing through narrow, damp alleys like the heartbeat of a city slowly stirring to life. The year is 4052. The stone beneath your straw mattress is cold, not the gentle cool of marble, but the bone-deep chill of rough-hewn Piatra Serena that has absorbed the night's dampness and holds it like a grudge. Your blanket is thin, woven from coarse wool, that scratches your skin with every movement, each fiber a reminder that comfort is a luxury you cannot afford. There is no glass on your window, only a wooden shutter, warped with age and weather, its gaps letting in the morning chill like whispered warnings of the day ahead. Through those gaps, you catch glimpses of the awakening city, the flicker of candles being lit in windows across the narrow street, the shadow of someone emptying a chamber pot with barely a glance below. The first stirrings of life in a world that shows no mercy to the slow. You sit up slowly, and immediately your body protests. Your limbs are stiff, your back sore from the hard bedding that offers no cushion between your bones and the unforgiving stone floor. But there is no time to stretch, no luxury of laziness. The city is waking. The day begins when the bells say it begins, not when your body feels ready. The room around you is barely wide enough to stretch your arms. If you were to lie down and extend your limbs, you could touch both walls. A space so cramped that even poverty feels confined. Its walls are plastered with lime, chipped in places where the dampness has worked its way through, creating abstract patterns of decay. The plaster is streaked with the moisture that seeps up from the ground floor, where the baker's family lives and works, their ovens providing the only reliable warmth in the building. You hear footsteps overhead, your neighbors beginning their day, and the familiar creak of wood, as Florence stirs like a living creature awakening from restless sleep. Someone is already at work above you, the rhythmic thump of a loom telling you that the weaver's wife has begun her daily battle against time and poverty. The sound is oddly comforting, a reminder that you are not alone in your struggle. The smell in your room is familiar, but far from pleasant. Smoke from last night's fire still clings to the ceiling beams like an unwelcome guest, mixing with the scent of your unwashed body and clothes. There is a faint sourness from the chamber pot in the corner, a clay vessel that serves as your only sanitation, and which you will empty later into the street channel, adding to the city's eternal perfume of human waste and desperation. The bread you left out last night has grown hard at the edges, curling like bark on a dying tree. It will still be edible, though you cannot afford to waste even the stalest crust. In Florence, food is precious, and every morsel must be consumed or saved for tomorrow's hunger. A single candle stub flickers on the wooden table beside your bed, Its wax has melted and cooled again many times, forming little hardened pools like frozen puddles on a winter morning. The candlestick itself is simple clay, unremarkable except for the fact that it represents a significant expense. Candles are costly, and light after sunset is a luxury that must be carefully rationed. You strike a piece of flint against steel, gently coaxing the flame back to life. The spark catches, and for a moment, the tiny flame dances uncertainly before settling into a steady glow. It's small, but it's enough to dress by. Enough to see your few possessions in the dim pre-dawn light. Your clothes are the same as yesterday, because they are your only set. This is not unusual. Most working people in Florence own perhaps 2 sets of clothing, one to wear while the other is being washed or mended. Your linen shirt, once white, has yellowed with age and countless wearings. The fabric is rough against your skin, woven on a simple loom by hands that prioritize durability over comfort. Your woolen hose itch where they meet your thighs. The coarse fibers a constant reminder of your station in life. They are held up by leather ties that you must adjust carefully. Lose them, and you'll spend the day in discomfort. Your belt is made of worn leather, soft in some places where your hands have touched it countless times, cracking in others where the weather and time have taken their toll. Your simple turn shoes stitched by hand by a cobbler who knows that his customers need function, not fashion, are thin-soled and patched more than once. The leather is soft from wear, molded to your feet like a second skin, but it offers little protection from the cold stones of the street or the sharp objects that litter the narrow alleys of Florence. You bend to splash your face in a basin of water that has sat overnight in your room. It's cold and smells faintly of the wooden barrel it came from. A barrel that catches rainwater from the roof and stores it for the building's residents. There is no soap, for that luxury is reserved for the wealthy and the very occasional feast day when you might afford a small piece of lye soap from the market. Just water, and your hands, and the hope that it helps wash away the grime of yesterday and prepare you for the grime of today. You run your wet hands through your hair, attempting to bring some order to the tangles that have formed overnight. Personal grooming is limited to what you can accomplish with water and your fingers. Outside, the city is truly waking now. Florence in the 15th century is alive with sound, a symphony of survival played out in narrow streets and cramped spaces. Wooden carts creak over cobblestones, their wheels worn smooth by countless journeys to and from the markets. The cobblestones themselves are uneven, laid not for comfort but for durability, creating a surface that jolts every step and reminds you that this city was built for function, not for the ease of its poorest inhabitants. Donkeys bray in the distance, their voices carrying over the rooftops as they begin another day of hauling goods through streets too narrow for larger carts. Vendors are already shouting from stalls still being assembled, their voices competing for attention in the early morning air. Fresh bread, olives from the hills, wine from the Chianti. Each cry is a small act of theatre, designed to attract the few coins that might change hands in the coming day. The sharp clack of hammers against wood echoes from the workshops where craftsmen are beginning their daily labor. The low chant of monks in procession drifts from the direction of Santa Maria Novella, their voices carrying prayers in Latin that most of the city's residents cannot understand, but find somehow comforting in their ancient certainty. And above it all, the bells. Always the bell. They do not ask for your attention, they command it. The great bronze voices of the Duomo, of Santa Croce, of every church in the city, marking the hours with an authority that no earthly power can challenge. They mark the hour of morning prayer, the opening of the market, the beginning of the day's labor. In Renaissance Florence, time belongs to God, and the bells are his messengers. The streets outside your building are narrow, more like corridors than roads, passages that were laid out centuries ago when the city was smaller and the world was different. The buildings lean inward, their upper stories jutting out over the street, creating a canopy of shadows that keeps the streets dim even in daylight. This is partly practical. It gives the upper floors more space, but it also creates a sense of enclosure, of being pressed down by the weight of the city itself. The air smells of many things: soot from the countless fires that provide heat and light, cooking oil from the early morning preparations of food vendors, the earthy smell of herbs and vegetables being unloaded from carts. But mingled with these more pleasant scents are others: waste, sweat, and the earthy rot of yesterday's market refuse that has been left to decompose in the streets. This is the reality of Renaissance Florence that few histories mention. Almost everyone used privies or chamber pots, which were emptied into open sewers that typically fed into streams, creeks, or adjacent rivers. There is no comprehensive sewer system as the Romans once built. Instead, waste is thrown into the street from windows above, sometimes with only a shout, "Attenzione," to warn those below. Little channels run down the sides of the roads, carved into the stone and meant to carry rainwater away from the buildings, but they are often clogged with refuse, human waste. The detritus of daily life. The smell is something you've grown accustomed to, but it never truly becomes pleasant. It's simply part of the fabric of urban life, as unavoidable as the sunrise. You step carefully as you make your way through the streets. A misstep might not just cost your footing. It could ruin the only shoes you own, or worse, send you tumbling into one of the waste channels that run alongside the narrow walkways. The cobblestones are slippery with moisture, and things you prefer not to think about too closely. Your destination is the wool district, a cluster of workshops crowded near the river, where the Arno flows sluggish and brown beneath low stone bridges. The wool industry is the backbone of Florence's economy, employing large numbers of people who worked in their own homes with tools supplied by the Lanioli and received wages by the piece. You are one of these thousands, a small cog in the great machine that has made Florence wealthy. You pass other workers on your way, faces like yours, tired, pale from indoor labor, hands calloused and raw from handling coarse materials day after day. Their clothes are similar to yours, practical, worn, patched where necessary. There is a solidarity in this shared condition, an unspoken understanding that you are all caught in the same struggle between survival and dignity. Some of these workers you recognize. There's Pietro the carder, whose hands are permanently stained with dye. Maria the spinner, whose fingers are so skilled they seem to move of their own accord. Giovanni the weaver, whose back is bent from years of hunching over his loom. Each carries the marks of their trade, the physical evidence of lives spent in service to Florence's textile industry. The workshop where you work is housed in a building that has seen better days. The stone walls are thick, built to last, but the interior shows the wear of constant use. You step inside, and immediately the atmosphere changes. It is dim, even with the morning light filtering through small windows. The windows themselves are more for air circulation than illumination. Glass is expensive, and most workshops make do with simple openings that can be shuttered against the weather. The smell of wet wool fills your lungs, slightly sour, and impossible to escape. It's a smell that will follow you home, that will cling to your clothes and hair until it becomes part of your identity. Wool in its raw state has a particular odor, earthy and animal-like, a reminder of the sheep from which it came, and the long journey it has taken to reach this cramped workshop in the heart of Florence. The master craftsman nods as you enter. He is not cruel, but he is not kind either. He has no time for kindness in a business where profit margins are thin and competition is fierce. He is a man caught between the demands of the merchant class above him and the needs of the workers below him. His face shows the strain of this position, and lined with worry, eyes that are always calculating, always watching for signs of trouble or opportunity. The room is full already. Men and boys bent over spinning wheels, dye vats, and carding combs. The workers range in age from children barely old enough to handle the tools, to old men whose hands shake with age, but whose experience makes them valuable. Their movements are practiced, mechanical, the result of years of repetition. There is little talking. Conversation slows the work, and slow work means less pay. The sound of the workshop is its own music, the whir of spinning wheels, the splash of wool being dunked in dye vats, the rhythmic scraping of carding combs. It's a symphony of labor, played out day after day in workshops throughout the city. The rhythm is hypnotic, almost soothing. Once you become accustomed to it, you take your place at a workstation that has been yours for the past 2 years. The tools are simple, but effective. Carding combs with wire teeth for straightening the wool fibers, a spinning wheel for turning the carded wool into thread, and various implements for handling the dyed materials. The workstation is yours only during working hours. At the end of each day, you must clean and arrange the tools for the next person, or for yourself the following morning. The hours pass in a blur of motion and repetition. Carding raw wool is slow, risk-taking work that requires constant attention to detail. The wool must be combed and pulled and straightened again and again until it's soft enough to spin into thread. Each batch of wool has its own character. Some is coarse and stubborn, requiring extra effort to prepare. Others are softer and more compliant. A small blessing in a day filled with small hardships. The raw wool comes from sheep raised in the Tuscan countryside, brought to Florence by merchants who understand the value of controlling each step of the production process. The wool varies in quality, depending on the breed of sheep, the season in which it was sheared, and how it has been stored and transported. Learning to recognize these differences and adjust your technique accordingly is part of the skill that separates experienced workers from newcomers. Once the wool is properly carded, it must be spun into thread. This requires a different kind of skill. The ability to maintain consistent tension and thickness while feeding the wool onto the spinning wheel. The thread must be strong enough to withstand the stresses of weaving, but not so thick that it creates irregularities in the final fabric. It's a delicate balance that takes years to master. The spun thread is then ready for dyeing, a process that transforms the natural brown and white of the wool into the rich colors that Florence is famous for. The dyes come from many sources, some from crushed roots, pulled from the earth around the city, others from insects imported from distant lands, still others from rare minerals that cost more than you earn in a month. The dyeing process itself is both art and science. The wool must be prepared with mordants, chemicals that help the dye bind to the fiber. The temperature of the dye bath must be carefully controlled, and the wool must be stirred constantly to ensure even coloring. Too hot and the wool becomes brittle, too cool, and the color doesn't take properly. The colors that emerge from the dye vats are beautiful. Deep blues from rich reds from madder root, golden yellows from saffron and turmeric, greens from a combination of blue and yellow dyes. Each color has its own character, its own challenges in achieving the perfect hue. But these beautiful colors are not for you. They will become robes for priests, whose wealth allows them to dress in fine fabrics that reflect their status in society. They will become tunics for merchants, who use their clothing to advertise their success and reliability. They will become drapes for noble windows, where they will hang in rooms you will never see, in palaces you will never enter. Your fingers are stained with these dyes, blue under the nails, green on the palms, red in the creases of your knuckles. The stains are permanent, a mark of your trade that identifies you as clearly as any uniform. But while your hands bear the color, the beauty they create belongs to someone else, someone who can afford to pay for the hours of labor that go into each piece of dyed wool. The dyes burn your hands in subtle ways. Some are caustic, eating away at your skin over time. Others cause rashes, or allergic reactions that you simply endure because there is no alternative. The madder root used for red dye is particularly harsh, leaving your hands raw and cracked. The indigo used for blue requires such strong mordants that your fingertips often crack and bleed by the end of the day. At midday, the bell rings again from the Duomo, its bronze voice cutting through the workshop noise to announce the meal break. It is time to eat. Though eating might be too generous a term for what most workers can afford, you step outside, not to rest. There is little time for true rest, but to catch your breath and give your aching hands a brief respite from the constant motion of carding and spinning. The alley behind the workshop is narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass. You sit on a wooden crate that someone has left there, probably a worker from another shop seeking the same small comfort you are. The crate is rough and splintered, but it's better than sitting on the cold stone. Lunch is simple and repetitive. A hunk of bread, hard at the edges where it has been exposed to air, and a small wedge of cheese with spots of mold that you scrape off with your knife. The bread is made from grain that includes barley and sometimes chestnuts, to stretch the more expensive wheat. It's filling, but not particularly flavorful. The cheese is sharp and salty, made from goat's milk and aged in caves in the hills around Florence. You drink wine, but not the fine vintage that flows at noble tables. Your wine is thin and sour, watered down to make it last longer and to reduce its cost. It's more like vinegar than wine, but it dulls the throat and the thirst, and makes the afternoon pass more quickly. The alcohol content is low enough that it won't impair your work, but high enough to provide a small escape from the tedium of the day. As you eat, you look around the alley at your fellow workers. Some speak softly in the Tuscan dialect, their voices carrying the musical cadence that marks them as locals. Others eat in silence, lost in their own thoughts or simply too tired to make conversation. The dialects spoken in Florence are numerous. Workers come from all over Tuscany and beyond, drawn by the promise of steady work in the wool trade. Children run by occasionally, barefoot and shrieking with joy. Their games are wild and improvised. A bit of twine becomes a bow, a stick becomes a sword, a hoop becomes a wheel to roll down the sloping streets. Their laughter is a reminder of a world beyond work, beyond the constant pressure to survive. But you are not a child, and you cannot remember the last time you felt that kind of pure joy. These children represent both hope and concern for the adults watching them. Some will grow up to join the workforce, learning skills that will allow them to earn a living. Others will fall victim to the diseases and accidents that claim so many young lives in Renaissance Florence. The mortality rate for children is high, and families often have many children in the hope that some will survive to adulthood. But even as a child, you would have been expected to contribute to the family's survival. Children as young as 6 or 7 begin helping with simple tasks, sorting wool, carrying water, running errands. By the time they reach their teens, they are expected to learn a trade or find other ways to contribute to the household income. You are expected to labor, to earn your daily bread through the sweat of your brow and the skill of your hands. There is no social safety net, no unemployment benefits, no retirement plan. You work or you do not eat. It's a simple equation that governs every aspect of your life. In the afternoon, the sun grows hot, beating down on the narrow streets and reflecting off the stone buildings. But inside the workshop, the air stays damp and close, thick with the humidity from the dye vats and the breath of the workers. Your shirt clings to your back, soaked with sweat that mixes with the wool dust and dye particles that fill the air. The wool dust is a constant presence, settling on every surface and finding its way into your lungs. Over time, this dust causes problems. Many wool workers develop a persistent cough, and older workers often have difficulty breathing. But there is no understanding of occupational health, no concept that working conditions might be changed to protect workers' health. The dust itches your arms and face, mixing with your sweat to create a gritty paste that you wipe away with a cloth that quickly becomes as dirty as your skin. Your eyes water from the particles in the air, and you blink frequently to try to clear them. But you do not complain. Complaining serves no purpose, and might mark you as a troublemaker. You do not complain because complaining is a luxury you cannot afford. Workers who complain too much or too often find themselves replaced by others, who are more desperate, more willing to accept poor conditions in exchange for the few coins that make survival possible. The workshop master has a dozen other workers he could hire tomorrow if you prove unsatisfactory. By mid-afternoon, your hands are tired and your forearms ache from the constant motion of carding wool. The muscles in your back protest from hunching over your work, and your feet hurt from standing on the hard stone floor. But you keep spinning, keep turning raw fiber into something that can be sold, something that generates the profit that keeps the workshop running and provides your meager wages. The repetitive motion of the work creates its own rhythm, almost meditative if you allow yourself to fall into it. Your hands move automatically, guided by muscle memory developed over years of practice. This automatic quality is both a blessing and a curse. It allows your mind to wander, but it also means that the work never truly challenges you, never offers the satisfaction of learning something new or solving a complex problem. Outside, the city continues its own rhythm. You hear the bell for Vespers, calling the faithful to evening prayer. You hear the clatter of hooves on stone as merchants and nobles move through the streets on horseback, their mounts' shoes striking sparks from the cobblestones. You hear a distant cry, perhaps a fight, perhaps an arrest, perhaps just someone calling to a friend across the crowded street. But you do not go to the window to investigate that world, the world of merchants and nobles, of political intrigue and artistic patronage, is not your world. Your world is this workshop, these tools, this endless cycle of preparing wool for others to wear. You have learned to keep your eyes on your work and your thoughts on your own survival. As evening approaches and the light begins to fade, you are finally allowed to leave. The workshop master inspects the day's work, noting which workers have been productive and which have fallen behind. Your work passes inspection, not outstanding, but adequate. Tomorrow, you will be allowed to return. The walk home is slower than the morning journey. Your legs are tired from standing all day, and your feet hurt from the hard floor of the workshop. The streets are busier now, filled with workers like yourself, making their way home, with carts returning from the day's markets, and with the evening activities of a city that never truly sleeps. You pass pilgrims lighting candles at the cathedral, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, as they pray for safe journeys or successful business ventures. The cathedral itself looms overhead, its massive dome a testament to the ambition and skill of Florence's architects and builders. But it also serves as a reminder of the vast gulf between those who commission such monuments and those who labor to build them. You hear laughter drifting from tavern windows, where others spend their hard-earned coins on wine and music and companionship. The taverns are warm and bright, filled with the sounds of conversation and song, but you cannot afford such luxuries. Your coins must be saved for tomorrow's bread, for next week's rent, for the inevitable emergencies that arise in a life lived so close to the edge of survival. The contrast between the tavern warmth and your own circumstances is stark, but you have learned not to dwell on it. Envy is another luxury you cannot afford. Instead, you focus on the simple fact that you have work, that you have earned another day's wages, that you will eat tonight and sleep with a roof over your head. You pass the Piazza della Signoria, the political heart of Florence, where statues watch over the square in silent judgment. The great Palazzo Vecchio looms over the piazza, its fortress-like walls and towers speaking of power and permanence. The building houses the government of the Florentine Republic, where decisions are made that affect the lives of everyone in the city, including yours. But you have no voice in that government. Sovereignty explicitly rested with the popolo, an elite class drawn from the 7 major guilds, or arti maggiori, that is, the judges and notaries, the calimala, bankers and international traders in cloth, the money changers, the silk merchants, the doctors and apothecaries, the wool merchants, and the dealers in furs. As a simple worker you are not a member of any guild, and therefore have no political rights. The statues in the piazza represent ideals of civic virtue and classical heroism, but they are carved from marble that cost more than you will earn in a lifetime. They speak of a world of art and culture and learning that exists parallel to your own world of work and survival, occasionally intersecting but never truly connecting. You pass a small workshop where a sculptor is still at work despite the fading light. A chisel rests against a block of marble, and you can see the rough outline of a face beginning to emerge from the stone. A sketch is pinned to the wall nearby, a drawing of a face that will never be carved, a dream that exists only on paper. You do not linger at the sculptor's workshop. Such places are not for you, and prolonged curiosity might be mistaken for something more troublesome. Besides, curfew is coming, and Florence is not safe for workers after dark. The city has laws that forbid the poor from wandering the streets after certain hours, laws that grant the city guards the right to question anyone they find suspicious, laws that assume guilt rather than innocence when dealing with the working class. These laws are enforced by guards who are often little better than the criminals they are supposed to catch, men who see their positions as opportunities for profit rather than service. And so you hurry through the darkening streets, your footsteps echoing off the stone walls of the buildings that press close on either side. The alleys are narrow and dark, lit only by the occasional candle in a window or torch carried by someone wealthy enough to afford such protection against the darkness. Back in your small room, the familiar chill welcomes you like an old friend. The space is exactly as you left it this morning, unchanged, and constant as your poverty. The candle stub on the table has burned down further, but there is still enough wax to provide light for the evening's simple activities. You remove your shoes carefully, checking them for damage that might require repair. The leather is soft from wear, molded to your feet, but you can see places where it is beginning to thin. Soon you will need to have them resoled, an expense that will require careful saving and planning. You stretch your toes on the stone floor, feeling the relief of being free from the confines of your shoe. Your feet are sore and swollen from the day's standing, and you massage them gently, working out the knots and tensions that have built up over the long hours. You eat again, The remains of the morning's bread. Perhaps some lentils cooked with onion and herbs. Always more bread. Bread is the foundation of your diet, the reliable source of calories that keeps you alive and functioning. The bread you eat is coarse and dark, made from grain that includes whatever is cheapest and most available. The lentils provide protein and variety, though are often old and sometimes contain small stones that you must be careful not to bite down on. The onion adds flavor and some nutrition, while the herbs, usually whatever grows wild in the countryside around Florence, provide a small connection to the world beyond the city wall. You sit in silence as you eat. Witty, there being no one to talk to and little to say even if there were. There is no book to read. Books are expensive and rare. And in any case, you cannot read. Literacy is a skill reserved for the wealthy and the clergy, not for wool workers who need only to know how to use their hands. There is no mirror in your room, no way to see yourself, except in the reflection of still water. This is perhaps a mercy, as the daily grind of labor has marked your face with lines of weariness and worry that you would rather not contemplate. There is no music except what drifts in from the street. The occasional song from a tavern, the chanting of monks, the lullabies mothers sing to their children in the apartments above and below yours. Music is something that happens around you, not something you participate in directly. Only the flame of your candle provides companionship, a flickering and dancing in the small drafts that find their way through the gaps in your shutters. You watch it sometimes, mesmerized by its simple constancy, its reliable presence in a world that offers few certainties, and your thoughts, in the quiet of the evening. Your mind finally has space to wander beyond the immediate demands of survival. You think about the day's work, about the colors you helped create, about the fabrics that will be made from the wool you processed. You wonder about the people who will wear those fabrics, about their lives and their concerns. You think about your family, scattered by death and economic necessity, your parents, who died when you were barely old enough to work, your siblings, who have found their own paths to survival in this harsh world. The connections that once bound you together have been stretched thin by distance and circumstance. You think about the future, though there is little point in such speculation. Tomorrow will be much like today, and the day after that much like tomorrow. The cycle of work and sleep and work again stretches ahead like an endless road with no visible destination. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, you allow yourself to dream of something different. Perhaps a world where work is rewarded with more than mere survival, where beauty is not reserved for the wealthy, where a person's worth is measured by more than their ability to process wool. You lie down once more on your straw mattress, the same bed you have slept in for the past 3 years. The straw has shifted beneath you over time, creating uneven lumps and hollows that you have learned to accommodate. The mattress is thin and provides little cushioning, but it is better than sleeping on the bare stone floor. The blanket feels rougher than it did this morning, or perhaps you are simply more aware of its coarseness. After a day of handling fine wool, the contrast is striking. You spend your days creating luxury for others, while living in conditions that most would consider barely adequate. Your body aches in quiet ways that have become so familiar. They are almost comforting, not pain sharp enough to cry out about, but a deep weariness that settles into your bones and reminds you of the price of survival. Your hands, stained with dyes and rough from handling wool, rest on your chest as you prepare for sleep. Tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that will look much the same as today. The bells will ring, the workshops will open, the wool will be processed, and you will earn another few coins toward your continued existence. There is a terrible predictability to it, but also a certain security in knowing what each day will bring. And yet, as your eyes begin to close, and the sounds of the city fade into the background, you think of the strange rumors you've been hearing lately in the workshops and taverns, stories that seem too fantastic to believe, but which are told with such conviction that they plant seeds of curiosity in your tired mind. There are whispers of a man who sketches flying machines, devices that could carry humans through the air like birds. The idea seems impossible, but the people telling these stories claim to have seen the drawings themselves, to have witnessed experiments that defy common sense. Someone has been buying dead animals, not for food, but to cut them open and study what lies inside. This practice seems both shocking and pointless, but again, The stories come from reliable sources who swear they have seen it with their own eyes. Most intriguing of all are the tales of notebooks filled with backward writing, symbols that no one can understand, drawings that seem to capture reality with impossible precision. The very idea of writing backwards seems like madness. But why would anyone invent such a strange detail? He lives nearby, they say, sometimes in Florence, sometimes gone for months at a time. He rarely finishes his work, abandoning projects that would make other men's reputation. But what he does create, no one has ever seen anything like it before. His name is whispered in the workshops and markets with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Some call him a genius, others a madman. Most simply call him Leonardo. The name hangs in your consciousness as sleep begins to claim you. Leonardo da Vinci, the illegitimate son of a notary, who has somehow transcended the circumstances of his birth to become something unprecedented. In a world where your birth determines your destiny, he represents the impossible possibility of transformation. As the city settles into its nightly quiet, as the last tavern songs fade and the final church bells ring the hour, you drift towards sleep with images of flying machines and backward writing dancing in your mind. Tomorrow will bring another day of wool and dye and aching hands. But tonight, for just a moment, you allow yourself to imagine a world where the impossible becomes possible. And in a workshop not far from yours, in a room lit by better candles and warmed by a more generous fire, that impossible world is becoming reality. While you sleep the sleep of the exhausted, Leonardo da Vinci sits awake, his mind racing with ideas that will not let him rest. His hand moving across paper in the strange reverse script that guards his thoughts from casual observer. He is awake while the city sleeps, dreaming while others rest, seeing futures that have not yet been born. And as the night deepens and Florence settles into its ancient rhythms, the contrast between your world and his becomes not just a difference of circumstance, but a testament to the mysterious power of human genius, to transcend the limitations that bind the rest of us to earth. The soft music of lute and harpsichord begins to play, gentle as wind through olive trees, as the tone of our story begins to shift from the grey reality of survival to the golden possibility of transcendence, from the weight of poverty to the weightless flight of imagination. Chapter 2. The Restless Mind of Leonardo, Genius in a Cage. Now, let us step away from the aching hands of the wool worker, from the damp stone walls and worn shoes, and walk instead into a different kind of world. Not one of wealth or ease, but of restlessness, of notebooks and sketches, of questions that do not sleep, of a mind too large for the time that held it. Leonardo da Vinci. His name today is weighty, familiar, revered, whispered through museum halls, printed in books, studied in schools. But in his own time he was something else. Not quite a painter, not quite an engineer, not quite a scholar, not quite a scientist. Always, not quite, a man in search of something more in a world not built to understand him. He was born on April 15th, 1452, in a small Tuscan town called Vinci, a hamlet of stone houses and olive groves, perched on hills that rolled like sleeping giants beneath the Tuscan sun. Illegitimate. The word carries weight even now, but in the 15th century, it was a brand, a mark that followed you through life, like a shadow you could never outrun. His father, Ser Piero da Vinci, a notary, respected, literate, a man who dealt in contracts and property, in the careful language of law and commerce, 25 years old, already climbing the ladder of Florentine society. His mother. Here the story grows murky. For centuries historians called her simply Caterina, a peasant girl, poor, nameless in many records, but recent scholarship has lifted the veil slightly. Caterina di Lippi, just 15 years old when Leonardo was born. Some scholars now suggest she may have been more than a local peasant, perhaps a slave from the Middle East or the Caucasus, brought to Italy in the thriving trade routes of the time. The truth remains elusive, wrapped in the silence that often shrouds the lives of women, especially poor women, in the Renaissance. What we know is this: during a visit to his hometown in July 1451, Ser Piero must have met Caterina, and gotten her pregnant. A brief encounter, perhaps passionate, perhaps predatory, we will never know. Leonardo was not supposed to become anything in being, presumably the illegitimate son of a slave, Leonardo could not follow in the footsteps of his father, and, continuing the family tradition, enter university, and then become a notary. He had no claim to land or legacy, no path toward the guilds, no entry into the professions that defined respectability. And yet, even as a child, he watched things differently. Picture him, a boy with wild, unkempt hair and intense eyes, wandering the hills around Vinci. He would lie in the fields, staring at the shapes of clouds, tracing the flight of birds with his finger as they carved invisible letters across the sky. He was fascinated by water, the way it curled around rocks in the stream, the way it caught and scattered sunlight in broken, dancing diamonds. He would spend hours watching it flow, already sensing patterns that would obsess him for a lifetime. There was no formal school for a boy like him, so he taught himself. He sketched charcoal on any surface he could find. The back of discarded parchment, smooth stones, the white walls of buildings. He copied leaves with obsessive precision, counting every vein, every serration along the edge. He drew shadows before he understood geometry, captured the play of light and dark with an instinct that seemed to bypass learning entirely. His grandfather, Antonio, watched this strange child with a mixture of bewilderment and pride. Here was a boy who could not read Latin, but could render the curve of a horse's neck with breathtaking accuracy. Eventually his father noted Piero busy with his legitimate family, his growing practice, his careful climb through Florentine society. Even he could not ignore the peculiar talent of his bastard son. And so, when Leonardo was perhaps 13 or 14, he was brought to Florence, to a man named Andrea del Verrocchio. Florence in the 1460s was a city drunk on its own magnificence. The Medici ruled from their palaces, their gold flowing like water through the streets, commissioning art, funding scholarship, turning the ancient city into a stage for human ambition and divine beauty. Workshops lined the narrow streets, not just places of craft, but laboratories of imagination. Here, art was not the solitary pursuit of tortured genius we imagine today. It was a collective endeavor, part guild, part factory, part school. Verrocchio's workshop was more than a studio, it was a crucible. Located near the Piazza della Signoria, it hummed with constant activity, the smell of linseed oil and turpentine, the scrape of chisels against marble, the soft whisper of brushes against canvas. Here, boys, some as young as 10, learned to grind pigment, to stretch canvas until it sang with tension, to sculpt clay with their fingers, to carve marble with infinite patience, to cast bronze in furnaces that roared like dragons. Andrea del Verrocchio, true eye, lived up to his name. He could see potential in a boy's hesitant first sketch, could spot genius hiding behind dirty fingernails and torn clothing. Leonardo arrived at this workshop like a refugee from a smaller world, his eyes wide, drinking in everything, the organized chaos of creation, the systematic approach to art that made the impossible seem routine. He was quiet, not shy, exactly, but inward, focused. While other apprentices chatted and joked, Leonardo watched. He would spend hours painting the scales of a fish, each one individually rendered with a precision that bordered on obsession, or perfecting the curl of a lock of hair, understanding that hair was not mere decoration, but a living thing that caught light, that moved with weight and momentum. He asked endless questions, not just about art, but about how joints moved, how muscles flexed beneath skin, how horses breathed when they ran, why birds could fly, and men could not. The other apprentices found him odd. Here was a boy who would dissect a dead bird to understand the architecture of its wings, who would stare at a candle flame for hours, studying the way it danced and flickered. But Verrocchio saw something else. He saw a mind that refused to accept the surface of things, that always asked why and how, with the relentless curiosity of a natural philosopher. One commission arrived that would change everything. The baptism of Christ, ordered by the monastery of San Salvi. The master set up the composition and painted the two main figures, Jesus and St. John the Baptist. It was standard practice. The master would handle the important figures, the central drama, while apprentices filled in backgrounds, painted drapery, added the supporting elements that gave the scene its fullness. Leonardo was assigned one of the angels, the figure on the left, kneeling on the bank of the Jordan River, holding Christ's garments. What happened next has become legend, perhaps more myth than truth, but myths sometimes carry deeper truths. than facts ever could. The angel on the left side is the part done by Leonardo da Vinci. He used oil, which was at that time a new medium in painting, while Verrocchio worked in the traditional tempera, pigments mixed with egg yolk, bright but flat. Leonardo experimented with oil paint, a medium that allowed for subtle gradations, for the kind of luminous depth that made painted figures seem to breathe with life. His angel emerged on the panel with a presence that stunned the workshop. Not just the technical mastery, though that was extraordinary enough, but something deeper, a psychological reality, a sense that this painted figure had thoughts, dreams, secrets. The story goes that when Verrocchio saw it, when he compared his own work to what his apprentice had created, he put down his brush and never painted again. Whether true or not, the anecdote captures something essential about Leonardo's emergence as an artist. He did not simply learn techniques, he transformed them. He did not follow rules, he discovered new ones. But Leonardo was not content with canvas. Even as he mastered the art of painting, his mind reached toward other mysteries. His notebooks began to multiply, small, bound volumes that he carried everywhere, filled with his peculiar mirror writing, elegant script that could only be read when held up to a glass. Some say he wrote backward to keep his ideas secret. Others believe it was simply more natural for his left hand. But perhaps it was something deeper, a mind that naturally saw things from the opposite direction, that approached problems from unexpected angles. These notebooks grew fatter with each passing year, filled with a fever dream of observation and invention. He studied anatomy in secret, first with animals found dead in the markets, later when he could manage it, with human corpses, in the flickering light of candles. Often working through the night, he would carefully dissect bodies, mapping the territories of flesh and bone with the dedication of an explorer charting unknown continents. He drew the bones of the hand in minute detail, understanding that each joint, each tendon, each minute articulation was a masterpiece of engineering that no human inventor could improve upon. He sketched the chambers of the heart, trying to understand how blood moved through the maze of arteries and veins. He was centuries ahead of William Harvey, who would not discover the circulation of blood until 1628. He rendered the muscles of the face with such precision that modern anatomists still reference his drawings. He wanted to understand not just how we look, but how we express emotion, how thoughts become visible in the subtle play of facial muscles. This was not mere curiosity. Leonardo understood that to paint life convincingly, he had to understand life completely. He could not simply copy what he saw. He had to comprehend the hidden mechanisms that made seeing possible, but his interest stretched far beyond the human body. He studied hydraulics with the passion of a man possessed. Water fascinated him, its flow, its power, its endless adaptability. He designed canals that could irrigate vast regions, pumps that could drain marshes, irrigation systems that could turn barren land into gardens. He understood that water was not just a substance but a force that could reshape the world. He studied flight with equal intensity. Hours spent watching birds, sketching their wings from every angle, trying to decode the secret of their mastery over gravity. In his notebooks we find designs for flying machines based on birds and bats, ornithopters with wings that flapped, helicopters powered by springs, parachutes that could carry a man safely to Earth. He wrote, "The bird is an instrument working according to mathematical law." If he could understand the mathematics, he believed he could build the machine that would lift man into the sky. But the world around him was not ready. Florence was a city of art, not of science, a place where beauty was prized, where the perfect curve of a Madonna's smile could make a man's fortune, but where curiosity about the natural world was often viewed with suspicion. The church, powerful and watchful, looked askance at those who peered too deeply into God's creation. Dissecting corpses was forbidden. Questioning the accepted order of things could be dangerous. And so much of Leonardo's most revolutionary work remained hidden in his notebooks, written in mirror script, disguised as casual observations. His reputation grew but slowly. He was known as a painter, a creator of beautiful objects, but the depth of his scientific investigation, the scope of his engineering imagination, remained largely secret. And so much of Leonardo's life was spent looking for patrons, looking for safety, looking for a place where his mind could stretch without fear of persecution or poverty. He moved from Florence to Milan in 1482, at age 30, not because he was driven out, but because he sensed opportunity. Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan, was building a court, gathering artists and scholars, like a merchant collecting rare gems. Leonardo wrote to him, offering his services as a military engineer. The letter still exists, and it reveals much about how Leonardo saw himself in the world. He promised bridges that could be built quickly, then destroyed if enemies approached. Siege machines that could break any wall, armored vehicles that could move through enemy lines like mechanical beasts, ships that could attack from underwater. Only at the end of this long list of military inventions did he mention, almost as an afterthought, that he could also paint. Milan offered him 18 years of relative stability. Here in the shadow of the Alps, he could work on a grand scale, the giant bronze horse he designed for Ludovico. It would have been the largest equestrian statue ever created, a monument to human ambition cast in 75 tons of bronze. But the bronze went to cannons instead. War came to Milan, as it always did, and artistic dreams gave way to military necessities. The horse remained unbuilt, existing only as drawings, as a full-sized clay model that French soldiers used for target practice when they conquered the city. This became the pattern of Leonardo's life: magnificent beginnings, incomplete endings. He painted the Last Supper on the wall of a monastery refectory, but experimented with a new technique that began to deteriorate even before he finished it. He began a massive fresco for the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, the Battle of Anghiari, that would have been his greatest public work. But again, experimental techniques failed, and the painting was abandoned, later covered by another artist's work. From Milan, his wanderings continued. Venice, where he designed ingenious defenses against Turkish invasion. Rome, where he hoped to find patronage under the new Medici Pope, each move carrying with him trunks filled with unfinished works, notebooks scrawled with inventions, and a reputation that preceded him like a strange, persistent rumor. Everywhere he went, he brought his questions. Why did the sky appear blue? How did the eye perceive depth? What made some faces beautiful and others forgettable? He offered his services as a military engineer, designing bridges that could be assembled quickly, siege machines that moved like living creatures, fortifications that could withstand any assault. But many of his inventions remained sketches, unbuilt, untested. The world was not ready for tanks and helicopters, for submarines and flying machines. He was a Renaissance man, dreaming of the modern world, but trapped in the Renaissance. He painted, when asked, portraits that captured not just appearance but something deeper, some essential quality of personality that seemed to glow from within the panel. But he rarely finished. The Adoration of the Magi, unfinished. Saint Jerome in the Wilderness, unfinished. Leda and the Swan, lost. Even his masterpieces carry the mark of his restless perfectionism. The Mona Lisa, La Gioconda, traveled with him for years, a small portrait he continued to refine with microscopic adjustments to the curve of her lips, the depth of her gaze, the mysterious landscape that stretches behind her like a dream of the world transformed. He was in many ways a man at war with time. There was never enough of it, never enough hours in the day to chase every question, to finish every drawing, to hold every idea before it slipped away like water through his fingers. In his notebooks we see this urgency. While I thought I was learning how to live, I have been learning how to die. His handwriting grows more hurried as he ages, as if he could outrun mortality by moving his pen faster across the page. He studied the tongue of a woodpecker, wondering how it could strike wood thousands of times without damage. He watched the whirlpool of water in a basin, seeing in its spiral motion the same patterns that governed the curl of hair, the spiral of seashells, the movement of galaxies across the night sky. He painted the smile of a woman with such subtle mystery that 5 centuries later we still debate what she was thinking, what secret knowledge played behind her half-closed eyes. And always he was making connections that others could not see. The branching of rivers and the branching of veins, the patterns of turbulence in water and the patterns of turbulence in air, the geometry of flowers and the geometry of fortification. He saw the world as one vast mechanism, governed by laws that could be discovered, understood, perhaps even improved upon. But he was alone in this vision. There were no scientific journals in which to publish his discoveries, no community of researchers with whom to share his insights, no universities where his investigations would be welcomed and continued. In 1516, at age 64, he accepted an invitation from Francis I of France. The young king, barely 22, had been dazzled by reports of the Italian master's genius. Leonardo travelled north to the chateau of Clos-Lucé, in the Loire Valley, a final refuge for a mind that had never found a true home in the world. Here, in his final years, he was honoured as he had never been in his native Italy. The king called him premier painter, engineer, and architect to the king. But more than that, he treated him as a philosopher, seeking his counsel on matters both practical and profound. Leonardo's right hand had been paralyzed by a stroke, but his left hand, his drawing hand, still moved with purpose. He continued to sketch, to observe, to question. Even in his final notebooks, we find designs for machines that would not be built for centuries. Automatic looms, precision gears, mechanical calculators. He was not wealthy. He was not always understood. He left behind no children, no school of followers, no great institution bearing his name. But he left his notebooks, his strange, marvelous, beautiful notebook, filled with mechanisms and muscles, with wings and water wheels, with maps of impossible worlds and machines that seemed to dream of the future. He left questions, so many questions. How do birds steer in flight? Why do rivers meander? What creates the illusion of distance in a landscape? How can man improve upon the designs of nature? He died on May 20, 1519, far from the hills of Vinci, far from the narrow alleys of Florence, where he had first learned to see the world with an artist's eye and a scientist's mind. Legend says that he died in the arms of the French king, but this is likely just that, a legend. Perhaps, more truthfully, he died as he lived, alone with his thoughts, unfinished, but full of wonder. His last words, recorded in his final will, seem to sum up a life of restless inquiry. I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have. Even at the end, he was his own harshest critic, seeing not what he had accomplished, but what remained undone. Tonight, as you drift into the quiet countries of sleep, perhaps your thoughts will follow him, into the quiet pages of a notebook where mirror writing catches candlelight like secret code, into the flight path of a bird whose wings write invisible equations across the mathematics of sky, into the rippling surface of water disturbed by wind, carrying patterns that connect the smallest stream to the largest ocean. And if they do, perhaps you will understand, not the man in full, for no one can be understood completely, but something of his rhythm. A rhythm not of completion but of beginning, not of answers but of questions, not of perfection but of relentless curiosity. A rhythm of a mind that saw more than it could ever capture, that dreamed farther than it could ever travel, that asked questions it could never fully answer. But perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the questions themselves are the gift, the wondering, the reaching, the refusal to accept that anything is exactly as it appears to be. In your dreams tonight, may you carry something of Leonardo's restlessness, his willingness to look closer, to ask why, to imagine what might be possible if only we had the courage to dream beyond the boundaries of what is. Sleep now, and dream of flying machines that dance with birds, of water that whispers the secrets of motion, of faces that hold mysteries deeper than any smile. Dream of a man who refused to be satisfied with the surface of things, who spent his life diving deeper into the beautiful complexity of the world. Chapter 3. The Secrets in the Smoke. Da Vinci's codes, symbols, and hidden messages. As the candle burns lower and your thoughts begin to soften, let us turn now to the mysteries that Leonardo left behind. Not his paintings, not his sculptures, but the thousands of pages filled with diagrams, fragments and signs, lines of reversed writing, drawings of machines that never moved, ideas whispered in ink as if meant only for himself. Picture, if you will, a dimly lit chamber in the monastery of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. The year is 1495. Leonardo sits hunched over his desk, a single candle casting dancing shadows across parchment. His left hand moves with peculiar grace, forming letters that seem to flow backward, as if time itself were writing in reverse. He wrote from right to left, using mirror script, not out of secrecy perhaps, but out of habit. He was left-handed, and the reversed lines allowed his hand to glide without smearing the fresh ink. Contemporary records confirm that Leonardo was indeed left-handed, known by his peers as Mancino, and the most widely accepted theory is that he wrote in reverse to prevent smudging his notes. Imagine the practical genius of this solution in an age of quill pens and wet ink. When a single smudge could destroy hours of meticulous work, Leonardo found a way to let his thoughts flow uninterrupted across the page. But there are other theories, deeper currents beneath the surface. Some believe he wrote backward to keep his ideas hidden from thieves, rivals, or even the church, because many of his ideas were not safe. Consider the world Leonardo inhabited. The Inquisition cast long shadows over intellectual inquiry. Anatomical dissection was forbidden. Yet Leonardo's notebooks reveal detailed studies of human corpses, His mechanical designs bordered on the fantastical. His astronomical observations challenged accepted doctrine. In such times, secrecy wasn't paranoia, it was survival. In those notebooks, Leonardo drew the inside of a human skull, long before anatomy was legal. He recorded the valves of the heart, the muscles of the neck, the folds of the brain. Picture him in the morgue of the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, working by lamplight in the pre-dawn hours. The stench of death mingles with the scent of his oils and ink. With surgical precision, he peels back layers of flesh, traces the pathways of nerves, maps the architecture of the human form. His hands, stained with both blood and ink, move between scalpel and pen with equal reverence. He did not just sketch, he measured, calculated, sought truth in proportion. Each line in his anatomical drawings represents hours of patient observation. He didn't simply copy what he saw, he understood it. When he drew the heart, he grasped its function as a part. When he studied the eye, he comprehended the principles of optics that wouldn't be formally described for another century. His mind worked like a precision instrument, dissecting not just bodies but the very mechanisms of life itself. The Vitruvian Man, that figure with arms outstretched inside a circle and square, is more than art. It is a diagram of harmony, a map of the human body as the mirror of the universe, an echo of a Roman architect's dream brought to life by a restless Florentine hand. But look closer at this famous drawing. Notice how the figure's navel sits precisely at the center of the circle. Observe how the square's proportions align with the span of the arms and the height of the man. This isn't mere artistic beauty, it's mathematical poetry. Leonardo was translating the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius's theories about ideal human proportions into visual form, but he was doing something more revolutionary. He was suggesting that human beings are themselves geometric perfection, living embodiments of universal harmony. The notes surrounding the figure, written in his characteristic mirror script, speak of measurements taken from life. From the hairline to the bottom of the chin is 1/10 of a man's height. From the bottom of the chin to the top of the head is 1/8 of a man's height, each proportion carefully observed, meticulously recorded, transforming the human body into a mathematical manuscript, written in flesh and bone. And then, there were the machines. Helical flying screws, gears and pulleys, automata, wooden lions that could walk and roar, carts that moved without being pushed. Imagine stepping into Leonardo's workshop on the Via Diagonalo in Florence. The space buzzes with creative chaos. Half-finished contraptions crowd every surface. Wooden gears lie scattered like the bones of mechanical skeletons. And everywhere, always, the rustle of paper covered in diagrams. And here stands his famous mechanical lion, commissioned for the entry of King Louis XII into Milan. Picture this marvel of Renaissance engineering. A wooden beast that could walk forward on hidden wheels, stop before the king, and open its chest to reveal not a heart, but a bouquet of lilies, the symbol of France. Many of these inventions remained on paper, dreams bound in leather folios, ideas without an age. His flying machine designs fill page after page, bat-winged contraptions that would carry a man aloft, ornithopters that mimicked the motion of birds, parachutes that could safely deliver a person to Earth from great heights. Modern engineers have tested these designs and found them remarkably sound in principle, though they lacked the lightweight materials and powerful engines that would make flight truly possible. Leonardo understood lift and thrust, drag and control surfaces. He was engineering for a future that wouldn't arrive for 4 centuries. But even more intriguing were his symbols. Leonardo da Vinci saw patterns where others saw chaos. He studied the way water spiraled down a drain. He noticed how smoke twisted in the air, how leaves grew around a stem. He believed that everything followed a hidden rhythm, and that through careful observation you could read the world. This was the heart of Leonardo's genius, his ability to perceive the underlying patterns that govern all natural phenomena. He spent countless hours by the Arno River, sketching the turbulent flow of water around rocks, noting how eddies formed and dissipated, and he watched smoke rise from chimneys, and saw in its spiraling motion the same mathematical principles that governed the growth of shells, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the curl of human hair. In his notebooks you'll find page after page of water studies, not just casual sketches, but detailed analyses of hydraulic principles. He understood that water always seeks its level, that it flows faster in narrow channels, that it carves canyons and builds deltas according to immutable laws. These weren't mere artistic observations, they were scientific investigations that anticipated modern fluid dynamics by centuries. In the margins of his notebooks he drew mazes, knots, curious arrangements of lines, circles, grids. Look closely at these marginal drawings, and you begin to sense something deeper at work. The knots aren't random tangles, they're mathematical puzzles, explorations of geometric possibility. Each loop and intersection follows rules, creating patterns that seem to echo the complex structures he observed in nature. Perhaps they represent his attempt to visualize the hidden connections between all things, the invisible threads that bind the universe together. One particularly intricate knot design, found in the Codex Atlanticus, has been analyzed by modern mathematicians and found to contain principles that wouldn't be formally described until the development of topology in the 19th century. And Leonardo wasn't just doodling, he was thinking in 3 dimensions, visualizing spatial relationships that challenged the very limits of human perception. One page shows a man's face half hidden behind strange writing. Another displays a coded message, a series of letters, layered and obscured. These cryptic images suggest a mind that delighted in puzzles, in hiding meaning within meaning. The face behind the writing might represent the human intellect partially concealed by the veil of language, or perhaps it's Leonardo's commentary on the difficulty of truly knowing another person. The coded messages remain largely undeciphered, tantalizing fragments of thoughts that may have been too dangerous, too precious, or too personal to express clearly. The Mona Lisa herself, perhaps his most famous work, is not immune to this mystery. Her smile, slight and shifting, has invited centuries of speculation. Some see peace in her face, others see knowing, some see a secret. But the mystery of La Gioconda runs deeper than her enigmatic expression. Recent analysis of the painting has revealed layers of meaning that continue to surprise scholars. X-ray examination shows that Leonardo changed the position of her hands during the painting process, suggesting he was continuously refining not just the visual composition but perhaps the symbolic content as well. The landscape behind her, that dreamlike vista of winding rivers and misty mountains, doesn't correspond to any real place, but seems to be Leonardo's vision of an ideal world, a perfect synthesis of water, earth, and air. Her eyes, when examined closely, contain microscopic letters and numbers, or so some claim. In 2010, members of Italy's National Committee for Cultural Heritage announced they had discovered tiny letters and numbers in the Mona Lisa's eyes, possibly C, E, or B in the left eye, and LV, potentially Leonardo's initials, in the right eye. However, scientific tests including X-ray fluorescent spectroscopy have not confirmed these findings, with some experts suggesting that people see patterns where none exist, due to their fascination with the painting. Are they intentional, a signature, a message, or are we simply reading too much into the smoke? This question strikes at the heart of Leonardo's enduring mystery. Perhaps the letters are there, tiny marks visible only under high magnification, Leonardo's secret signature hidden in plain sight for 5 centuries, or perhaps they're the result of age, of paint cracking in patterns that our pattern-seeking minds interpret as meaningful symbols. The truth may be unknowable, but the very debate reveals something profound about Leonardo's legacy. He created works so rich in possibility that each generation finds new mysteries within them. There is a page, now housed in the Codex Atlanticus, on which Leonardo sketched a bridge, longer than any in Europe at the time. It was never built, but when modern engineers reconstructed it, they found it would have worked. Stable, elegant, self-supporting. This bridge design, created for Sultan Bayezid II of the Ottoman Empire around 1502, would have spanned the Golden Horn in Constantinople. At 240 meters long, it would have been the longest bridge in the world at that time. Leonardo's design was revolutionary, a single span with no supporting pillars, relying on the archer's natural strength to carry enormous loads. When Norwegian artist Vebjørn Sand built a scaled version in Norway in 2001, it proved perfectly stable, demonstrating the soundness of Leonardo's engineering principles. The original design exists as a single sheet in Leonardo's notebooks, elegant curves, accompanied by calculations, written in mirror script. Imagine if the Sultan had accepted this proposal. The skyline of Istanbul today might feature Leonardo's graceful arch, a permanent bridge between East and West, between Renaissance Italy and the Ottoman Empire, between one vision of the future and another. Another page contains a design for a diving suit, complete with breathing tubes, and another shows a machine that, centuries later, would resemble the very first helicopter. His diving apparatus, designed for underwater exploration of the Venetian lagoon, anticipates modern scuba equipment with remarkable accuracy. The suit includes a breathing apparatus connected to a floating cork device, weighted boots for underwater walking, and even a bag for collecting specimens. Leonardo understood that underwater exploration required solving problems of breathing, movement, and buoyancy, challenges that wouldn't be fully addressed until the 20th century. The helicopter design, his famous aerial screw, demonstrates his understanding that vertical flight required a different approach than horizontal flight. By studying the motion of spinning maple seeds, he realized that rotating surfaces could generate lift. His design called for a helical surface to be turned rapidly by the operator, pulling the machine upward through the air like a screw through wood. While impractical with Renaissance materials and human power, the principle was sound. It anticipated the helicopter by 4.5 centuries. It is as though Leonardo glimpsed a future that no one else could see, and left us only sketches of it, as if to say, this could be. His notebooks are filled with such prophetic vision: tanks rolling across battlefields, submarines lurking beneath the waves, automobiles moving without horses, machines that could print multiple copies of books, devices that could capture the human voice and replay it. Each design represents not just mechanical ingenuity but imaginative leap, the ability to envision technologies that his world couldn't build but future worlds would need. Consider his design for a robotic knight, created for one of Ludovico Sforza's court entertainments. This mechanical figure could stand, sit, raise its visor, and move its arms. Modern reconstructions show that the design would have worked, making it perhaps the first programmable robot in history. Leonardo wasn't just imagining distant futures, he was engineering them, one gear and pulley at a time. And then there are the theories, the speculation, the stories woven long after his death. Some say he was part of secret societies, that he hid messages in his art, that his inventions were encoded with meaning, alchemical, astronomical, even divine. The centuries following Leonardo's death saw the growth of legends that transformed him from Renaissance polymath into mystical figure. Some claimed he was a member of the Priory of Sion, a secret society dedicated to preserving ancient mysteries. Others suggested his paintings contained hidden maps to buried treasures, or codes that would reveal the location of the Holy Grail. While these theories lack historical evidence, they reveal something important about Leonardo's lasting impact. His work was so far ahead of its time that it seemed almost supernatural to later generations. The reality is both more mundane and more extraordinary. Leonardo was indeed secretive, but probably for practical reasons. His engineering designs could be military secrets. His anatomical studies violated religious prohibitions. His mirror writing protected his ideas from casual thieves, while remaining readable to serious scholars. He encoded his thoughts not in mystical symbols but in the patient language of observation and experiment. They point to the Last Supper, to the way the apostles are arranged, to the hands, the bread, the absence of a chalice, to the strange perspective, the shadows, the possible presence of a woman beside Christ. The Last Supper, painted on the wall of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, has been analyzed more intensively than perhaps any other painting in history. Modern conspiracy theories focus on the figure of John, seated to Christ's right, suggesting this youthful apostle is actually Mary Magdalene. They point to the feminine features, the flowing hair, the gap between Christ and John, that seems to form a V-shape, but historical context suggests simpler explanations. Renaissance artists often depicted young men with feminine features. It was considered the height of beauty. The absence of a chalice in the scene isn't mysterious. Leonardo chose to depict the moment when Christ announces his betrayal, not the institution of the Eucharist. The perspectival tricks and symbolic arrangements that seem so coded to modern eyes were standard Renaissance techniques for creating visual drama and theological meaning. Was it just artistic license? Perhaps the most important message in The Last Supper isn't hidden at all. It's displayed boldly across the entire composition. That's Leonardo has captured the precise moment when Christ says, "One of you will betray me." Look at the apostles' faces, their gestures, their body language. Each group of three reacts differently. Some shocked, some questioning, some defensive. This is Leonardo's meditation on human nature, on how people respond to devastating truth. The real code isn't in secret symbols, but in the psychology he's painted into every figure. Leonardo never said, he left no confession, no diary of intentions. only notebooks, filled with questions, filled with lines that curve like riverbeds through the human mind. This may be the most honest thing we can say about Leonardo's intentions. His notebooks, which survive in scattered collections around the world, contain over 7,000 pages of observations, sketches, and calculations. They reveal a mind that was endlessly curious but rarely conclusive. He asked thousands of questions. Why is the sky blue? How do birds change direction in flight? What makes water flow uphill in plants? How can machines multiply human strength? But he provided few final answers. Instead, his notebooks read like a conversation with the universe, an ongoing dialogue between human curiosity and natural mystery. The codes in his work may simply be the traces of a mind that thought in patterns, connections, and possibilities rather than fixed conclusions. But perhaps the truth is simpler and deeper. Perhaps Leonardo hid things not out of malice, or secrecy, or drama, but because the world was not ready, because he knew what it meant to be questioned, to be misunderstood, to live in a time when the line between brilliance and heresy was measured in whispers. Consider what it meant to be intellectually curious in Leonardo's time. The church maintained strict control over acceptable knowledge. Aristotelian philosophy dominated universities. Dissection of human bodies was forbidden. Mechanical invention was often seen as impious attempt to improve on God's creation. In such a world, Leonardo's boundless curiosity made him perpetually vulnerable to suspicion. His notebooks reveal the careful balance he maintained. Religious imagery appears throughout his scientific observations, suggesting his attempt to frame inquiry as worship rather than challenge. His anatomical studies include prayers and references to divine creation. His mechanical designs often invoke God's wisdom in natural form. He wasn't hiding atheistic heresies. He was trying to present revolutionary ideas in acceptable religious language, so he kept his thoughts to himself and to paper, and let the future decide what to do with them. This decision to record rather than publish, to preserve rather than promote, may have been Leonardo's wisest choice. By keeping his discoveries private, he protected both himself and his ideas. The notebooks survived the decades of religious conflict that followed his death. They outlasted the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution. When the world was finally ready for his insights, they were still there waiting in libraries and private collections, patient as Leonardo himself had been. Modern scholars continue to discover new meanings in pages that have been studied for centuries. Each generation brings new tools, new perspectives, new questions to Leonardo's work. X-ray analysis reveals hidden layers in his painting. Computer modeling tests the feasibility of his mechanical designs. Advances in neuroscience illuminate his studies of human anatomy. The notebooks that seemed hopelessly ahead of their time in 1519. Think about the profound loneliness this must have represented. To see so clearly, to understand so much, but to have no one with whom to share these discoveries. Leonardo lived much of his intellectual life in isolation, conversing mainly with his notebooks, trusting his insights to posterity rather than to contemporaries. Yet perhaps this solitude was also a gift. It freed him from the need to conform, to explain, to justify. He could follow his curiosity wherever it led. As you lie here tonight, listening to the quiet, perhaps you feel the pulse of curiosity, the urge to ask, to wonder, to see beyond what is visible. That feeling, that gentle flicker of awe, is part of Leonardo's gift. Not the answers, but the questions, in the darkness of your bedroom, in the soft space between waking and sleep. You might sense something of what Leonardo felt in his candlelit workshop. The world around us is filled with mysteries, not supernatural secrets, but natural wonders waiting to be understood. Why do our hearts beat in rhythm? How do our minds create dreams? What makes music beautiful? What draws us to certain faces, certain landscapes, certain ideas? Leonardo's true legacy isn't a cache of hidden codes or secret societies. It's permission to wonder, permission to look closely, permission to question everything and to find beauty in the questioning itself. He showed us that observation is a form of worship, that curiosity is a kind of love, that the patient pursuit of understanding is among the most human of activity. The soft smoke that rises from his pages still curls in the air, inviting you to follow, to trace the symbols and to dream. Picture that smoke now, not just metaphorical smoke, but real wisps rising from the candles in Leonardo's workshop, carrying with them the scent of ink and parchment, wood shavings and oil paint. These materials have long since turned to dust, but the thoughts they preserved continue to spiral upward through time. reaching us across 5 centuries of human history. As sleep approaches, let yourself follow these spirals of curiosity. Let your mind wander through Leonardo's questions, his observations, his gentle doubts. You don't need to solve the mysteries he posed. It's enough to wonder at them. In wondering, you become part of the great conversation that began in a Renaissance workshop, and continues wherever humans gather to ask, what if? How does this work? What might be possible? The symbols Leonardo left us aren't coded messages waiting to be cracked. They're invitations to see the world as he saw it, not as a collection of fixed facts, but as an endless source of wonder. Every spiral in flowing water, every curve in a bird's wing, every smile on a human face contains patterns that echo throughout the universe. Leonardo taught us to see these connections, to trace these patterns, to find meaning not in final answers, but in the beautiful questions that bind all things together. Rest now in this gentle uncertainty. Let Leonardo's curiosity become your lullaby, his wonder your pathway into dream. In sleep, as in his notebooks, the boundaries between possibility and reality soften. In dreams, as in his workshop, anything might be possible. The helicopter might rise, the bridge might span impossible distances, the secrets in the smoke might finally reveal themselves, not as answers, but as new questions, beautiful and endless as the spiral patterns Leonardo loved to draw. Ambient transition, the turning of pages, a soft exhale of breath, faint footsteps echoing down a hallway of stone, and the distant sound of wind moving through the leaves of a tree, the same eternal patterns that captured Leonardo's attention centuries ago, still spiraling through time, still waiting to be understood. Modern scholars continue to discover new meanings in pages that have been studied for centuries. Each generation brings new tools, new perspectives, new questions to Leonardo's work. X-ray analysis reveals hidden layers in his painting. Computer modeling tests the feasibility of his mechanical designs. Advances in neuroscience illuminate his studies of human anatomy. The notebooks that seemed hopelessly ahead of their time in 1590 continue to yield insights into. Think about the profound loneliness this must have represented. To see so clearly, to understand so much, but to have no one with whom to share these discoveries. Leonardo lived much of his intellectual life in isolation, conversing mainly with his notebooks, trusting his insights to posterity rather than to contemporaries. Yet perhaps this solitude was also a gift. It freed him from the need to conform, to explain, to justify. He could follow his curiosity wherever it led, confident that someday, someone would understand. Chapter 4. Feasting with the Medici. Power, patronage, and pretending to be civilized. We've seen the world through the eyes of a worker, the sketches of a restless genius, the symbols left behind in notebooks like whispers from the past. Now, let us look upward, into the candlelit halls of power. Let us walk quietly into a world draped in velvet, perfumed with oils, echoing with music, and murmured Latin. Let us enter the courts of the Medici. The Medici were not born noble, they were bankers. But in Renaissance Florence, gold could polish any name. It began with Giovanni de' Medici, who in 1397 founded what would become the most powerful bank in Europe. While Siena had dominated Italian banking for centuries, Giovanni saw opportunity in the growing city of Florence. He understood something others had missed, that money, properly managed, could reshape the world. By the time his son Cosimo the Elder took control in 1434, the Medici Bank stretched across Europe, from London to Constantinople, from Bruges to Naples. They held accounts for kings, financed papal elections, and controlled the flow of gold that made the Renaissance possible. By the 15th century, they were Florence. They controlled the city's finances, its politics, its art, its future. But power built on gold is fragile as glass. The Medici knew this. Every generation faced rivals, conspiracies, the constant threat of political winds shifting. They funded cathedrals, universities, monasteries not from generosity alone, but from necessity. In a world where legitimacy came from God or sword, they chose a third path. Culture as currency, art as armor. They commissioned frescoes, sculptures, and symphonies. They built libraries that housed the rescued wisdom of antiquity. And through it all, they dined in style. To walk into a Medici feast was to enter a theater of power, disguised as pleasure. Imagine the hall, The Palazzo Medici, designed by Michelozzo to whisper rather than shout wealth. Long, vaulted spaces stretch before you, candlelit and perfumed. Tapestries line the walls, depicting ancient battles and sacred scenes, but also subtly woven. The Medici coat of arms, 6 balls of gold on a field of blue, a symbol now more recognized in Florence than the cross itself. Tables stretch beneath gilded chandeliers, their surfaces heavy with silver platters and woven fruit baskets. The very plates tell stories, Majolica pottery from Firenze, painted with mythological scenes that educated as they entertained. Venetian glass goblets catch the light, each one worth more than a craftsman's yearly wage. The air itself is orchestrated, roasted game, honeyed almonds, crushed herbs from the monastery gardens, and beneath it all, the subtle burn of precious oils, frankincense from the east, amber from the Baltic, scents that spoke of trade routes spanning continents. You are not seated at the main table, that belongs to the family, to Cosimo the Elder, called Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland, though he never held official title. To Lorenzo the Magnificent, poet and patron, who could discuss Plato's Republic as easily as the price of wool. To Giuliano, young and handsome, destined for tragedy in the cathedral's nave. Each more polished than the last, they speak in Latin and Tuscan, sometimes Greek when they wish privacy among the learned. Their hands move with studied grace, every gesture taught by masters of etiquette, imported from the courts of France and Burgundy. Their robes are cut from silk that travelled the Marco Polo routes, dyed with pigments worth their weight in silver. Fur lines the sleeves, ermine for winter, but cut to show restraint, because power must look effortless, as natural as breathing, as inevitable as sunrise. The guests raise goblets of wine from the family vineyards in Chianti and Carmignano, but these are no ordinary vintages. Some have aged for decades in cellars, carved into hillsides. Others are mixed with honey and spices from Constantinople, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, each grain more valuable than common gold. They toast not just to health, but to alliances, to the friendship between Florence and France, to the success of our ventures in Bruges, to the continued prosperity of the papal accounts. Every word, every smile is measured, weighed like coins on a merchant scale. Because here conversation is commerce, wit is weapon, and silence can be the loudest statement of all. To be at a Medici banquet is not to eat, it is to perform. The dishes come in waves, each one a work of art that speaks before it's tasted. First, the antipasti, spiced olives from Tuscan groves, each one stuffed with almonds and preserved in oil pressed from the first harvest. Fresh cheese from the countryside, still warm from the morning milking, served with honey that carries the taste of mountain wildflowers. Sweet wine from Malvasia vines, golden as liquid amber, poured from ewers shaped like mythical beasts. Then come the premier courses, platters bearing whole roasted peacocks, their iridescent feathers carefully reattached, each one gilded with actual gold leaf until they seem to glow in the candlelight. The birds are brought in with musical fanfare, lutes and tambourines. A stuffed boar's head follows, tusks polished to ivory brightness, rosemary and bay leaves tucked artfully in its snout. The herb scent mixing with the rich aroma of wine-dark meat that has roasted since before dawn. Bowls of quince jelly shimmer like captured sunlight, each spoonful sweet and tart on tongues already overwhelmed by richness. Platters of eel from the Arno, skinned and prepared with techniques learned from monastery kitchens, where monks had perfected the art of transforming humble river fish into delicacies fit for papal tables. Pastries arrive shaped like birds in flight, swans with wings spread, peacocks with tails fanned, each one a masterpiece of sugar and flour that will be admired more than eaten. Because here even sweetness serves a purpose beyond mere pleasure. Sturgeon from the northern seas, its flesh firm and pink, served with sauces that blend Roman tradition with Oriental spices. Each recipe a secret passed down through generations of cooks who served God and Mammon with equal devotion. All of it exquisite and largely for show, because food here is language. The richer the table, the deeper the message. We are the center of this world. We are the ones who make abundance possible. Through us, Florence feeds. And yet, behind the silks and silver, the Medici were always calculated. This feast cost more than most Florentines would see in a lifetime. The peacock alone, with its imported spices, its gold leaf decoration, its musical presentation, represented weeks of labor for the craftsmen who made it possible. But every florin spent was an investment in loyalty, in reputation, in the delicate web of obligation and gratitude that held their world together. They used art as currency. Leonardo was not just a painter, he was a symbol, a tool of prestige, a walking advertisement that proclaimed, "Look what Florence produced, look what the Medici make possible." They funded Michelangelo's early work, gave him marble and time when he was still an unknown apprentice with gifted hands. They commissioned Botticelli to paint not just beauty but philosophy, Venus rising from foam, spring eternal, allegories that made their court seem touched by divine favor. Brunelleschi's dome crowning the cathedral, that was Medici gold reaching toward heaven, a statement in stone that would outlast any human ambition, but not out of kindness, out of strategy. Every chapel they funded bore their coat of arms. Every fresco they commissioned included their portraits, often kneeling beside saints, suggesting divine approval of earthly power. Every library they built contained books that told the stories they wanted told, histories that painted them as natural leaders, philosophers who proved that wisdom and wealth could walk hand in hand. By placing their names on chapels, their likenesses in sculpture, their emblems on painted ceilings, they became eternal. In a world where plague could strike without warning, where political fortunes could change overnight, where even the mightiest families could fall to exile or assassination, immortality was built, not promised. Outside the banquet halls, beyond the thick walls of the Palazzo Medici, the city grew darker. Workers labored through the night in workshops that filled the Medici coffers, their hands raw from wool and silk and metal, their lungs thick with dust from the industries that made luxury possible. Children sold apples in the street, their voices thin with hunger, calling prices in coins they'd never possess. Beggars sat outside churches, hands trembling not just from cold, but from the diseases that poverty invited, consumption, dropsy, the slow wasting that came from want. The night air carried sounds from both worlds, the laughter of the feast, floating over garden walls, mixing with the cries of merchants closing shop, the prayers of those who had only hope for supper. But inside, there was music. A lute strummed softly in the corner, played by a musician trained in the courts of northern Italy, his fingers finding melodies that spoke of longing and satisfaction in equal measure. A singer performed verses from Dante, his voice carrying words that every educated Florentine knew by heart, but here transformed into entertainment for those who could afford to treat poetry as decoration. The conversation floated like incense through the hall. Philosophy, astronomy, poetry, and politics, always politics. Because to be elite in Florence was not to be free. It was to live under constant performance. Smile as you were watched by those who served you, and those who sought to replace you. To praise while you plotted. To embrace while you calculated the worth of every gesture. To wear your wealth like heavy armor, beautiful but restrictive, protective but never comfortable. Every thread must be perfect, every word must be measured. Every alliance must be weighed against the possibility of future betrayal. Lorenzo the Magnificent wrote some of the most beautiful poetry of his age, but even his verses served diplomatic purposes, gifts to foreign courts that carried messages more subtle than any ambassador's words. Cosimo the Elder, who transformed banking from mere commerce into statecraft, rarely slept through the night. His servants whispered that they often found him in his private study before dawn, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence from across Europe, calculating not just profit but the shifting weight of international power. He understood that money, properly deployed, could accomplish what armies only dreamed of achieving. A loan to the right prince at the right moment could secure decades of favorable trade. A withdrawal of support could topple governments without a single sword being drawn. Lorenzo, his grandson, inherited this wisdom but added to it a poet's understanding of human nature. He knew that people could be moved by beauty as much as by gold, that a perfectly crafted sonnet could accomplish what 1,000 florins could not. His courtyard conversations with Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola weren't just intellectual pleasure, they were investments in the currency of ideas, building Florence's reputation as the new Athens, where philosophy and commerce danced together in perfect harmony. But Giuliano, young Giuliano, Lorenzo's beloved brother, carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never known that power could be lost as quickly as it was gained. He flirted with the wives of lesser nobles, wrote love poems that circulated through the city, rode through the streets as if he owned them, which, in many ways, he did. He never learned the careful dance that his older brother had mastered by necessity. Never understood that in Florence, Even family love could become a weapon in enemies' hands. The Patsy conspiracy would teach him that lesson, but the price of education would be blood on cathedral stone, and screams echoing off frescoed walls where angels watched human ambition destroy itself. But tonight, in this moment frozen in candlelight and wine, Giuliano still laughs at his brother's subtle jokes, still raises his goblet to toast the future they both assume will resemble the present. The conversation continues to flow like music, discussions of Plato's ideal republic, debates about whether the newly discovered lands across the Western Ocean will change the balance of European power. Some guests argue that these discoveries will make Mediterranean trade obsolete, that the future belongs to nations with Atlantic coastlines. Others insist that Florence, with its accumulated wisdom and established networks, will adapt and prosper no matter what changes come. Lorenzo listens to both sides with the careful attention of someone who knows that today's absurd theory might become tomorrow's unavoidable reality. The walls themselves tell stories within stories. Frescoes commissioned from Benozzo Gozzoli show the journey of the Magi to Bethlehem, but the faces of the wise men bear suspicious resemblance to Medici ancestors, and the crowd of followers includes portraits of contemporary allies and rivals alike. Every guest can read these visual messages, understanding that they're not just viewing religious art, but a complex map of current loyalties and future aspirations. The very architecture speaks of calculated magnificence, ceilings painted with mythological scenes that celebrate virtues like prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. The same virtues that the Medici claimed guided their rule of Florence, but hidden among the classical references are symbols that only the initiated recognize. Alchemical signs, Platonic geometry, references to the Hermetic tradition that Lorenzo and his circle pursued in private, seeking wisdom that might give them power over fate itself, because to live at this level was to inhabit a world where truth itself became a luxury few could afford. Every smile was strategic, every friendship was conditional, every expression of love or loyalty carried the possibility of future manipulation. The women at these feasts, wives and daughters of prominent families, occasional mistresses acknowledged through careful social mathematics, understood this dance as well as any man. They wore their jewels like armor of a different sort, each necklace and bracelet a statement of their family's current standing in the complex hierarchy that governed Florentine society. Their conversations, conducted in voices trained to carry just far enough and no farther, wove networks of information that complemented the men's more obvious displays of power. A casual mention of a daughter's marriage prospects could seal a business alliance. A seemingly innocent question about a rival family's investments could reveal crucial intelligence about market movements or political shifts. And the children, those who were old enough to attend these gatherings, but young enough to still believe in the fairy tale their parents performed every night, they watched with wide eyes as adults played games they couldn't yet understand, learning by observation that love and power were currencies to be spent wisely, never freely given. Young Giovanni, who would someday become Pope Leo X, already showed signs of understanding that his future lay not in Florence but in Rome, where Medici gold might purchase the highest throne in Christendom. He listened to theological debates with the same careful attention his uncles paid to discussions of trade routes, already calculating how philosophy and faith might serve political ends. The feast reaches its crescendo as servants bring in the final course. Subtleties, elaborate constructions of sugar and spice that recreate in miniature entire mythological scenes. A sugar Mount Parnassus complete with tiny Apollo and the 9 muses, each figure delicately painted with colors made from ground pearls and gold. A recreation of the Florentine skyline in marzipan and honey, every tower and dome perfect in proportion. The whole thing so beautiful that destroying it by eating seems almost sacrilegious. But destruction here is part of the message. The ability to create beauty and then consume it demonstrates a wealth so profound that even masterpieces become momentary pleasures. As the wine continues to flow and the conversation grows more intimate, more dangerous, the masks begin to slip just slightly. Lorenzo speaks of his dreams, not just for Florence, but for a new kind of Europe where culture might triumph over brute force, where the pen might prove mightier than the sword not because poets claimed it but because bankers made it profitable. Others discuss the new learning coming from Constantinople, as Greek scholars flee the Ottoman advance, bringing with them manuscripts that had been lost to Western Europe for centuries. And now, we return to stillness. You've walked the streets of Renaissance Florence, felt the ache of labor, the press of cobblestones beneath warm soles. You've stepped into the restless mind of Leonardo, where thoughts flew faster than time and dreams outpaced invention. You've traced the curling smoke of mystery, followed inked lines through codes and spirals, and dined in silence beside the powerful, where every toast concealed intention and every smile a calculation. All of it woven into the same tapestry, a city of light and shadow, of marble and mud, of ideas that stretched toward the stars, and hands that washed in the Arno. Perhaps tonight you'll dream of sketchbooks fluttering open in candlelight, of birds caught in still motion, of bridges that never touched the river, of a man who whispered secrets to no one except the pages in his lap. Perhaps you'll dream of another world, a slower one. Harder, yes, but filled with wonder, with a kind of beauty that had to be built by hand, by mind, by patient brushstrokes, one after the other. You were a worker, you were a dreamer, you were a guest at the Medici's table, and now you are simply still. Let your breath settle, let the bells fade into memory, let the cobbled streets dissolve beneath your feet, because the story is finished. The candles have burned low, the notebooks are closed, and Florence sleeps, and so should you. Good night.